Meatheads, simpletons, muscle-bound freaks, Dragon Ball Z fans. These are the people who solo leveling will apply to, and these are the people that solo leveling is catered to. And damn it, if I'm not at least one of these, I don't know what I am. A lot of anime fans and manga fans, or really fans of Eastern media in general, seem to have the idea that simplicity is bad, or that if you don't talk about real life issues, tackle deep themes, or have some sort of symbolism within your story, it's basically not okay for you to enjoy something or just have a fun time in general. This is an idea that I personally heavily disagree with, and I even plan on making a video centered around this topic in the future. I think that solo leveling is a prime example of simplicity, of just enjoyment, pure euphoria, and having fun being the case just due to the fact that it's really appealing to, well, buffoons. Now listen. Intro and jokes aside, I do not think that you have to be stupid to like solo leveling. Nor do I think you have to be a muscle-bound freak or any of the things that I did allude to in the intro. But I do think that when you get into something like this, something like solo leveling, you have to temper your expectations for this. But before we get into that, let me just explain what solo leveling really is, and start a new video series on the channel, kind of explain those at the same time. The goal of the beauty of videos is simply to talk about what I think makes certain form of media great, good, or even just something that is enjoyable in general. In this series, I will try to at least start off with talking about media that I enjoy, that I don't think gets the love it deserves, or it's just not talked about all over the place in the anime YouTube community in general. One of them being solo leveling is something that I haven't seen people do that much, so I wanted to step up to the task and, try to do that. This will also function as a sort of recommendation to watch or read this form of media that I'll be talking about. So with all that out of the way, get your popcorn, your soda, sit down, and listen to me talk about the beauty of solo leveling. Solo leveling, first of all, is a Manhwa webcomic, meaning that it actually isn't based in Japan, but is Korean-based fiction. Wait, before you click off, just know this is not one of those really bad or annoyingly stretched out webcomics like you might have seen on Webtoon. This is actually a quality read that I myself recommend, and it's something that I've even reread up to, my favorite parts of the manhwa. The plot of this story is pretty simple. It takes place in a world that acts pretty similar to ours until an event happens that spawns in dungeons that appear within the real world. Within these dungeons, many different types of demons and monsters are festering within them, along with many riches and things that can be used throughout the economy of this world. As a byproduct of this event, many people gained superhuman abilities and were given the title of hunters. Now, these hunters had many different ranks, going all the way from E, which was the lowest, all the way to S, which is the highest or the top echelon of hunters within this verse. Our main character, Sung Jin Woo, is one of these hunters as well, although he is known as the weakest hunter in existence. In the beginning of the story, we see him go on a mission into a dungeon that gets him and the companions that he was traveling with in danger and results in his death, or what would be his death, before he gains the chance to live once more, and with this revival, he gains the ability to level up, which essentially allows him the unique ability to get stronger with training and fighting throughout this webcomic, and basically it's something that directly contrasts the other things like other ranked hunters don't have this ability to grow stronger, and we basically follow through his journey of gaining strength and the ability to support him and his family. Now, after hearing me describe this story and go over the quick synopsis, the story may seem generic or something that would be boring to read or watch plot-wise, and heck, it may even seem like something that you've read or watched before, and well, while the plot isn't anything to be, clapping at, it's not some piece de resistance in terms of its story or its premise, that isn't really what makes this manhwa what it is. It really isn't what makes this the enjoyable read that I found it to be. It is most certainly the execution of this premise and how it goes about its storytelling that really makes it something that, well, I would like to talk about. First, let's start off with the simplest yet arguably most impressive thing that this manhwa presents, and that is the impeccable art. I mean, just look at the panels. Look at the art, the coloring, the dynamic poses that this manhwa shows off. It's outstanding to say the least. One look at solo leveling characters or fights and you can really see just how well the digital art is used in this story. From the shading and the gradient of the skin colors that gives the characters, to the bright flashy attacks that we get to look at from Sung Jin-woo himself. In every single fight that we see, it makes reading this story that much more enjoyable. And, in fact, is a big part of the reason that I myself got sucked into this webcomic. To be completely honest, it's very visually pleasing. Honestly, it is kind of difficult to bring up things to talk about when mentioning the visual art style of Solo Leveling, since plain and simple the art is really good, but since this is a review of everything that makes Solo Leveling what it is, I think it's up to me to talk about it. And I think it really plays well to the strength of being colored for the reasons that I did previously lay out. Now, the thing about this art style and the way the panels flow is that it differs much from the style of the solid ink and black and white that most manga have, because of the difference in the way that these mediums are created. Webcomics and things in the same manhwa genre usually have the benefit of being able to color their comics digitally with the purpose of putting them on webtoon or some other form of digital media, which not only saves money and time in comparison to traditional art and coloring, but in comparison you can see that the color really does help this stand out as something that is extremely visually pleasing and intriguing. I'll be showing examples up as you're watching this right now, and you could just see, even though the art in both of these is very good, very outstanding, right? You can just tell that the color does add just a little bit of flair and a little bit of pop to the manhwa that you just don't get in a regularly drawn out manga. And the reason most manga aren't colored is just because coloring traditional is something that is time consuming and something that gets rather expensive if you try to do it on a very large scale. As for the panels, I think that Solo Leveling really plays to its strength by using the reading format, which is essentially a long scroll down your phone, computer, or tablet, or any other reading electronic device that you choose to use, and it uses this long scroll to create shots that something really only formatted like this can make. Once again, I use a manga panel versus panel from a webcomic like Solo Leveling just to highlight the difference in the way that these two are structured. This difference does create some drawbacks that a manga's page turning format can compensate for, but it does help break the monotony that you sometimes feel when you have read so many manga and see similar panels, shots, and camera angles being used over and over again, which just contribute to the overall unique and beautiful aesthetic that Solo Leveling brings to the table. Like I said, you get these very dynamic shots of just these long panel shots, these long scroll down that really give you a feel of exploration and just something that you can't really get when you read a manga. Once again, nothing against manga. I love manga, right? I love the format, and they do present their own benefits and drawbacks with each of these things. I'm just bringing up the fact that Solo Leveling and the webcomic genre in general does bring this unique flair that a lot of manga just can't really bring just due to the difference in the medium. Now, while on the topic of art style and visuals, I do find it appropriate just to briefly mention the possibility of a webcomic like Solo Leveling receiving an anime adaptation similar to the slightly known webcomic Tower of God. My opinion on this is kinda mixed for a few reasons, if I'm being 100% honest. On one hand, I have seen Tower of God's animation, and while it doesn't look horrible by any means, it isn't something that I'd personally get invested in by the looks alone, and for something that looks as good as Solo Leveling, I think that adapting this into an anime and only having mediocre visuals would really do a disservice to the manhwa in general. But, on the other hand, if Solo Leveling got a good studio to take care of it, got that ufotable, got that Demon Slayer treatment, and really put the time and effort into adapting the story and the visuals into a style that would work for the manhwa, I would love to see all of these fights adapted because they are just amazing to look at even when reading. And the insane thing is, this is merely one part of why I would strongly recommend this story to you if you like meathead anime or manga, or You are someone who can just sit back and enjoy a story for what it is and not really look too deep into a story or meaning behind it, which I personally have not found within Solo Leveling. Once again, no shots towards it. I think Solo Leveling does exactly what it sets out to do. But to be perfectly honest, I think that deeper themes, deeper messages, symbolism isn't really needed because of how well the fights look and how much hype these fights make me feel, along with many other people that read it feel. Which brings me to the next major advantage of Solo Leveling. This right here is where my fellow fans of hype, cool, badass scenes will really enjoy themselves, and this is simply due to Solo Leveling's ability to effectively build hype to the maximum. Now, building hype is something that I personally think is underrated and downplayed in anime and manga, reviewing and discussion as a whole when these mediums are being analyzed in general, and I think that's something that Solo Leveling is great at. Now, the idea of this being underrated and the building of hype is something that, I've personally been having a thought in my head for a while. I think that people do underrate the relevancy of being able to build up hype for certain fight scenes, but that's just my own personal opinion on the matter. Once again, something I'd like to explore later, but that's for another day. Now, the hype that this manhwa builds is absolutely insane, and part of the reason for this is just the way that the main character, Sung Jin Woo, progresses throughout the story in terms of his power. After gaining the ability to level up, Sung Jin Woo's progression of power is extremely interesting to watch, or I should say, read, and I think handles this progression really well through most of the story. And I would even go so far as to say that it handles the progression of power better than other shows or manga that try to do something similar. Say something like Dragon Ball Z in particular, and especially something like Dragon Ball Super. Now, I may have just dropped a bomb on all my fellow Dragon Ball Z fans, and I need you guys to put your pitchforks down because I am about to briefly explain why I think this is the case, okay? There may be a hot take, and I may be strung up for this one, but I do think that at least initially, right, Solo Leveling does progress the main character's strength at a better, steadier, and more consistent pace than the later arcs of Dragon Ball Z, and especially Dragon Ball Super does. The reasoning for this is pretty simple, right? I just think that the later arcs of Dragon Ball Z, mainly the Buu Saga, and then after that, move through the progression too fast. They make the power that the main character or just side characters, important characters to the story, have gotten seem irrelevant too quickly. For example, the Super Saiyan 2 transformation that we had just been introduced to perfectly in the Cell Saga was now essentially useless in the Buu Saga. And same thing with Super Saiyan 3 to Dragon Ball Super, same thing with Super Saiyan God to Dragon Ball Super, Blue, and so on and so forth. Now, trust me, this is not a shot at Dragon Ball Z, because I do genuinely love the series, and I do think that it does many things better than Solo Leveling, one being the themes that it presents. So I'm not saying that Solo Leveling is a better story than Dragon Ball. All I'm saying is that its progression of power in particular, in my personal opinion at least, handles itself better for the reasons that I'll get into now. Now, the reason for this, the reason for my thinking of the progression in Solo Leveling being so great is pretty simple. We have points of reference for Sung Jin Woo in the Solo Leveling world that we just don't get in Dragon Ball sometimes. What I mean by this is that Sung Jin Woo is the surrogate character for us, basically meaning that we get to see the world for what it is and from what he sees it as. And as he grows and progresses, we get to see it and we get to progress with him. We get our mindsets to change with him. And this leads to some very interesting perspectives that I think because with each threat that Sung Jin Woo faces, you get the feeling that you yourself are overcoming these threats and growing stronger as you see it. Meaning that the progression feels steadier and harder and grittier in order to get to the next level of power. And I think that's what makes the progression so much more enjoyable than something like, say, the Buu Saga or the later arcs of Dragon Ball Super. We also get points of reference throughout the series of the ceiling of the verse, like the S ranks and the gaps between them all in terms of strength. So from a very early on point in the series, we do get to understand the difference between a C rank and a B rank, and a B rank and an A rank, and an A rank and an S rank, right? We do get to understand just how much ground Sung Jin Woo has to cover, and I think that is very important when you're trying to establish how far the character can really go. And, just how far Sung Jin Woo, our main character, and the character that gets most of the screen time, obviously, will go. It also doesn't hurt that the story goes out of its way to characterize Sung Jin Woo's personality and demeanor before gaining his ability, and this leads to the tension of these fights being used to the fullest because we as the audience truly feel that he is just on the brink of losing in his first fights. Like, right after he gets the ability to level up, I genuinely thought that he may have actually just been beaten again and been forced back down into the hole of weakness that he had just crawled out of. But when he pulls through, it gives you just this high of euphoria that gets you hooked, so you want to keep reading. The tension is also greatly helped by the fact that Sung Jin Woo does indeed lose fights within this series even after gaining his abilities. Like, after going to his first gate that the game or the system that he calls it gives him, he fights someone, he fights this entity, barely beats it, clinging onto his life, and understands that if he were to go in, if he were to fight that, like, the final boss of that stage, he would get completely and utterly obliterated, which puts things into perspective. And it really just shows us that our main protagonist, our main character, does have growing to do. And they do have, and he sometimes needs more of a push, he needs to train himself. And sometimes he gets saved by the power system, or gets lucky, which really just shows us that he's not invincible, which I think is really important, and basically he won't win every single match, which is, like I said, important if you want the audience to consistently and constantly flow with the ups and downs of fight scenes and the manhwa in general. Another thing that I think needs to be touched on is how the fights look outside the realm of its art style and art quality, and that just stems from the dynamic posing and choreography that this uses, and the camera angles, which is honestly an underrated thing in and of itself. But this makes the fight seem very interesting and pleasing to read. Solo leveling also keeps all of its fights really fresh by continuously giving Sung Jin Woo new abilities and new tools that he can use within battle, and this really helps to keep the fights fresh and interesting, which is extremely important when the main appeal to this is the badassery and the meathead fights. Plain and simple. I think it actually handles stuff like this and the overall progression really well, but I'll get to the progression after I get to the next segment. Now, if you remember, I mentioned the badass and hype scenes that solo leveling is pretty famous for, and I'm going to mention these now. But for all of you that are watching this video and have not read the manhwa, no need to worry. I won't be spoiling anything that you need to worry about. I'll just be mentioning these certain fights and scenes out of any story context and without giving you too many details, or mentioning things that have a major impact on the story. So, let's get right into the flexes. To be completely honest with you guys, when I went back and reread these fights in order to recall them for you and get the scans from the webcomic in order to show you the fight scenes in particular, it made me remember just how interesting this manhwa was to me, and in all honesty, it's one of the most interesting and fun reads that I've had in a while. It's something that I've gotten invested in within mere chapters of me reading it, and I hope that some of these flexes, along with the rest of the video, really hope to help get you into the story, or if it's something that already got you into the story, just a fun video for you to enjoy. But on to the first major display of power that Sung Jin Woo has, and we'll go through with a couple, maybe 2 or 3 flexes. Now, for the first major cool scene that this has, just after testing out his abilities, or his leveling up abilities for the first time, Sung Jin Woo finds a monster that is rampaging in the city near to him, and after approaching it, realizes that it is a rank below the monsters that he had just fought previously and ranked up from. And the first thing he does is he takes his broken sword and he chucks it at this monster, trying to just help out the other hunters that are trying to fight it off and fend it off. And he casually one-shots this monster just by throwing his sword and amping his arm's strength up a bit. Now, that in and of itself would just be a cool scene, right? It wouldn't necessarily be like a flex. He's not doing anything particularly interesting or anything that's like, oh, he's inadvertently flexing, right? But it's the fact that after this, we see him think, we see the dialogue or the monologue in his head basically saying, oh, I didn't expect to one-shot it. Did I put too much power into my strike? And this, I think, is just one of the first inklings of an indication that we get that Sung Jin Woo is going to be a major, a person that just his confidence will go through the roof, and so will the badass scenes that he contributes to. Now, this is one of the inadvertent cool scenes that Sung Jin Woo has. There's a point in the story where Sung Jin Woo's leveling up ability isn't necessarily completely found out, but he does get reawakened, and this reawakening is basically his reassessment of his new abilities, and come to find out that at this point in time, he's S-rank hunter, or an S-rank hunter in terms of his strength, right? And, there's another character, an A rank hunter, nothing to scoff at, mind you, but, not in the realm of S rank, right? So basically, these people are coming to interview him, right? People are coming to interview the A rank, right? Who just got awakened and who's just basically showing off their abilities and starting off their career as an A rank hunter, right? And as the reporters go over to talk to him, Sung Jin Woo walks out of the building that is right next to the A rank hunter. And as soon as he does so, all the reporters ignore the A rank hunter that they were basically, their job was to go over and interview him, and flock to Sung Jin Woo, surrounding him to the point where he can't even escape, right? Which is just like the just thinking about it is so interesting to me, because it's just like this. It's just the way Sung Jin Woo is. It's just, this to me encompasses a lot of what this is. It's a lot of cool scenes, right? That just make Sung Jin Woo a much cooler character than he had to be. And it's just something that I just find it amazing for this. And once again, this is only one aspect of the solo leveling as a whole. And while it is the main aspect, or while it is one of the best aspects, right, I think it's something that, a lot of manga, anime, Eastern media in general can master. The art of hype. Hold up, that might be a video idea. But anyways, I think that this is something that it does really well. And, after this, we're gonna move on. But these are just two examples, because I want you guys to experience these cool scenes for yourself. But these are just two examples of Sung Jin Woo being a badass. So definitely, if you like that type of stuff, I could not recommend solo leveling more. Finally, I want to bring up one of the things that, no matter what, kept the series fresh in my mind, and is something that you could get hooked on almost instantly. And it's something that I even touched on earlier, just not as majorly as I plan to now. And that is the progression of the story, character, scale, and powers. Every single one of these aspects of progression, solo leveling handles amazingly, in my opinion. But first, let's start off with the main and only character that this series focuses on, Sung Jin Woo. Now, you could see, a focus on only the main character as a drawback, and I would personally agree. I think a side cast of characters is always important to have, but the progression that the character Sung Jin Woo gets is something that I think is really good. The development and progression that Sung Jin Woo goes through within the first 30 or so chapters or episodes, wherever you want to call this, of this manhwa is really good, and something that I suggest you experience for yourself for the full effect. But in essence, Sung Jin Woo struggles with his past weakness, and through physically progressing and through actually putting himself in life and death situations over and over and beating into his head that strength is what makes him have value. And to be completely honest, even though this progression is extremely simple, it's enough to make you really root for him and want him to push himself even further and beat anyone that is within his path. And that path runs parallel with Sung Jin Woo's character progression, and basically is the progression of his power and abilities that runs parallel. This is simply due to the confidence and demeanor changing as he himself physically changes. I think these two things running alongside each other is very important, just because it acts like a literal and physical manifestation of Sung Jin Woo's growth and development in the series, and it lets you sit back as a reader and easily digest the material that you're reading, since its main purpose is to be a meathead manhwa. Once again, if you meathead, good stuff. Now, we see throughout this manhwa that Sun Woo's physical changes and his attitude towards combat as well changes, with him morphing from the meek and weak person who avoided combat unless it was to keep his family above water, to someone who saw combat and fighting as just another way for him to get stronger and level up and progress. Now, this is more of a personal thing and something that you'd most likely relate to if you read your story yourself, but Sung Jin Woo's story journey seems so human, yet so cool, that at least I can't help be sucked into this story and the pretty simple narrative, even after reading through it thoroughly and reading through it again thoroughly for the research for this video. Just as the power increases along the character of Sung Jin Woo, the story and scale of the verse increases and run parallel as well. Even though the story doesn't become much more than the premise that I outlined in the beginning of this video, Sung Jin-woo does get into trouble and some hijinks because of his unusual ability to evolve and grow in strength. Similarly, just as the stakes don't drastically become different, they do slightly increase, but it's a notable increase nonetheless. And this slight yet noticeable increase is what I really think this manhwa does well. The pacing that this series has, especially initially, is so amazing. It's just fast enough that you're always motivated to keep scrolling as you read, but it's never so fast that you feel like your ankles are getting broken and you're getting left behind in the dust, which I think balances it out so that you could basically be honed, and it can really be honed due to the manhwa's simplicity. A short anecdote: when someone first told me to read Solo Leveling, and I did, I think I read the first 60 chapters in a day. Just to tell you how good the pacing was and how intriguing it was to me, I read the first 100 chapters in a day. Which is, whew, my eyes were burning and my head was aching, but it was worth it because I had a really good time when I was reading it and I was hooked. And honestly, it has made it one of the most enjoyable reads I've had in a while, and something that I can't really recommend more. As we close out this video, I would just like to say that I do acknowledge that Solo Leveling is not perfect. It has flaws, and it's far from it. It doesn't really build characters out of Sung Jin-woo. There aren't really themes that run through the core of this manhwa, and as it goes on, you can notice a steady decline in quality as you get to its final arc of Season 1. But even acknowledging the flaws like that, it's something that I really recommend that you read all the way through. Like I kind of alluded to in the beginning of the video, people that are either straight meatheads, which once again I'm going to batter into your head that is not an insult. People that are meatheads, enjoy cool fights, good art, an amazing hype buildup, or just people that are down to turn off your brain and just have a really good time following a guy on a path to get stronger, Solo Leveling is for you. And I think it's this simple yet amazing nature that really brings out the beauty of Solo Leveling. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I wanted to try something really different on the channel and see how you guys would receive videos like this. This is my first video essay thingy on the channel, and this is the start of a series that I hope goes for a nice long time. The Beauty of series is a series that I will basically be focusing on things that I don't think get that much love, right? Things that aren't talked about that much, like I alluded to in the intro, and it'll basically be talking about the good of the manhwa, manga, anime, or any media or anything that I decide to talk about. That is what the Beauty of series will mainly focus on. I'll have other series, other analysis series that'll basically be focusing more on criticisms for different anime and manga, but that's not what this series is for. If you enjoyed it and think it's a series that you would like to see continue with a plethora of other anime or genres, let me know in the comment section down below, as I'll be looking down there for ideas. If you have criticisms and ways that you think I can improve this video, either editing wise, because I've never edited like this before, or any other types of things, just let me know in the comments down below as well. Anyways, if you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, and subscribe if you haven't done on any of those things already, and make sure to go check out Solo Leveling for me, guys. Anyways, peace.